Hi, folks. Good morning and welcome to the podcast. My name is Andy Shepherd. I'm the clinical lead here at ReadyCare. So this morning we're going to be talking about something that's close to my heart, which is coffee. So this is one actually for the longest time I was thinking I don't really want to know, because if I read something saying that it's bad, I'm probably going to ignore it and take my chances, because I'm definitely a caffeine addict. So full upfront disclosure there, I'm not here to kind of poo-poo all over coffee and say it's really bad for you. So this is going to be quite a balanced and actually a very interesting topic, but nuanced more than you would think. So you might think coffee might be bad for your heart. It speeds up your heart rate. It gives you anxiety and jitters. It can interfere with your sleep. They're all the things that we know about coffee, but actually it's a bit of a mixed bag. So let me explain. All right, so first we need to look at what does coffee do. So coffee itself, if we look at, the polyphenol structure of it, elicits what's known as a hormetic stress on the body. It gives you what we call polyphenols, so kind of plant-based chemicals that are, in the broad scale of things, good for you. They can trigger autoimmune symptoms in some people, but broadly speaking, they're good for you. But what does caffeine do? Because that's why we drink coffee for the most part, unless we're drinking decaf for the taste. So the main thing that it does is it ramps up your central nervous system activation, known as your CNS. So that's where we talk about things like adrenaline, cortisol, fight or flight hormones, norepinephrine, epinephrine. These kind of get into action type hormones. So it stimulates all of those. So that's one of the reasons you get a little bit of get up and go out of it. Another reason that you get motivated on coffee, and this is really interesting. I thought that coffee would directly produce dopamine. So you drink coffee, you get dopamine. In the same way that you eat sugar, you get dopamine. You smoke, you drink, you take drugs, you get dopamine, and so on. But it actually works in a different way. It makes the receptor for dopamine much more sensitive, so that your body can uptake the dopamine that you already have much more efficiently. So what this means is that stuff that wasn't particularly motivating to you before you drank coffee can appear more motivating afterwards, which is really interesting. That's why a lot of people feel like in order to get their head stuck into work or do the bit of cleaning around the downstairs or whatever it is, that they need their coffee in the morning. So what they're referring to there is that I'm much more motivated if I have coffee. It's not that it gives you the energy to do it per se. It does a little bit through the CNS activation. It's more so to do with the fact that it makes you more sensitive to dopamine by sensitizing the receptor. So basically it makes you more likely to do something that wouldn't motivate you otherwise, which makes sense, because I often find that I'm a little bit more excited or motivated to do work and get stuck into it if I've had a couple of coffees. And it's not an energy thing, because broadly, my energy would be pretty okay. Another thing it does, which is really important, is that it is a really strong diuretic. So you will lose sodium and potassium. So it's very important to stay hydrated if you're drinking coffee. So people will often say, well, I'm drinking like a liter a day in coffee. Well, then you're minus 500 or 600 mils in terms of your overall hydration status. So you lose sodium and potassium. So ideally, salt foods, get a good bit of water into you, and that should balance that out. Now, one of the main reasons we drink coffee is to feel more awake. And the science behind this is actually interesting. So there's a receptor in your body called adenosine. Now, adenosine is something that builds up throughout the day and then wears off while you're asleep. So you'll have it when you wake up for a couple of hours. It's basically the sleepiness chemical. So when you wake up, you'll have it for a couple of hours. Now, adenosine should still be in your body, because your body doesn't get rid of all of it while you're sleeping. You still feel a bit sleepy for a couple of hours after waking up. Interestingly, if you drink coffee, here's the adenosine receptor. Coffee kind of covers or caffeine covers the adenosine receptor. And it's not that you don't have adenosine. It's not that you don't feel sleepy, but your body is blocking. It's putting a barricade or a block up, saying that I'm not going to allow you to absorb all the adenosine that's floating around in your bloodstream and in your body. So it's not that coffee gives you energy per se. It just blocks your ability to feel tired, which you may experience as similar phenomenon. But at the same time, it's a very important differentiation. So it's blocking your ability to feel tired. So you didn't have that much sleep. You get up in the morning, you were feeling sleepy, you didn't want to feel sleepy, and then you blocked your body's ability to feel sleepy. Now, the reason this is really important is that when the coffee is then dislodged from the adenosine receptor, so caffeine has I should say caffeine instead of coffee, sorry. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 to 8 hours, which means 6 hours after you drink it, half of it will still be active in your bloodstream. So 7, 8, 9 hours later, most of it is gone. It's almost completely gone. And you'll notice this phenomenon where if you drink coffee at 8 in the morning and you're going all day, you're going for half the day, you've had 3, 4 coffees, and then around 2 o'clock, because you stop drinking coffee at 11 or 12, around 2, 3, 4 o'clock, you get a bit of a slump. Now, that can be from food as well, from glucose dysregulation or carbs and sugar. But often you'll get that caffeine dump. And some people will keep drinking it, and that's where coffee becomes a problem because it interferes with sleep. So again, the crash that we experience is not just because the caffeine is wearing off, but because the caffeine is no longer blocking the adenosine receptor. And then we have all that adenosine that's been floating around all day long from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12, 1 o'clock, when it would naturally wear off, is going, time for us to go in, boys. And you just get really sleepy and you get that crash. So that's what the caffeine crash is. That's the kind of the broad science behind it. So looking back on the health aspects then of coffee, and more specifically caffeine, I mean, back as far as the 70s, the World Health Organization were saying that coffee might be a probable carcinogen, and the World Health Organization have got a lot of stuff wrong. I won't go into that too much, but they've got a lot of stuff wrong. From fat increasing your risk of heart disease, red meat increasing your risk of cancer. They still say that, which is wild. Other stuff that I won't go into. But the idea that coffee might cause cancer was based on poorly designed, what we call epidemiological studies, meaning that those who drink the most coffee get the most cancer. Those who eat the most XYZ food get the most cancer. That sort of stuff, which shows a correlation and no causative mechanism. They never actually said, here's how coffee might cause cancer, because it doesn't. And then they turned around a couple of years later, 20, 25, 30 years later, and said, actually, it looks from the thousands of studies that we've looked at now, it probably reduces your risk of, I think it was colorectal cancer and liver cancer, interestingly enough. Coffee doesn't cause cancer. It doesn't even increase your risk of cancer. So no need to worry about that. So you then look at the mechanisms of what caffeine does. So we know it increases your blood pressure. It increases blood flow. It also increases your heart rate, your body temperature, all that sort of stuff. Now, sometimes people will say to me, saunas can't be good for your heart because they increase your heart rate and you sweat and they increase your blood pressure. And then I'll say, well, if that's the case, then exercise can't be good for you. And they'll go, oh yeah, never thought about it that way. So something that increases your heart rate and your blood flow and your blood pressure, I mean, if it was a drug, for example, that's not natural and your body doesn't know what to do with it. But in the case of caffeine, this type of a light stimulant relative to heavier stimulant drugs, we'll say, it's actually good. So it causes what's known as a hormetic stressor. Hormesis is the idea that you put stress in a particular system, and the adaptive response of that system is to become stronger in the future to deal with that stress going forward. So intermittent fasting, exercise, sauna, cold exposure, all of those things are hormetic stressors. Even plants actually cause a hormetic stress. So, and that stress can be good for some people and bad for others if they have autoimmune conditions. So it does all of this stuff, and you would think, well, surely if it does that, it's going to be bad for cardiovascular risk. But overall, when we look at the broad literature, it's very, very clear, actually. It reduces risk of cardiovascular disease. Nothing major, but it certainly doesn't increase risk of cardiovascular disease. Improves all-cause mortality, which means dying from anything prematurely that's kind of disease-related. Reduces your risk of cancer and reduces your risk of type 2 diabetes. The only caveat there is that you can offset that by having like a frappuccino with 18 spoons of sugar in them. Those frozen coffees are horrendously bad for you. They're like 3 cans of Coke level of sugar in them. There was one that we used to get, my wife and I used to get, I think it was a McDonald's frappuccino or something like that, until I realized there was like 18 spoons of sugar in it, something like that, just crazy. And if you want to know how many spoons of sugar equivalent are in the likes of a iced coffee like that or a frappuccino, take the sugar number and divide it by 4. So if it says it has 48 grams of sugar in it, that's around 12 spoons of sugar. And often you'll see it's about 60 or 70. Okay, so doesn't appear to be bad for your health. In fact, the broad scope of the literature, the upshot of the literature is appears to reduce your risk of most chronic diseases as opposed to increasing. This is really, really important. There are 2 aspects of your health when it comes to caffeine that can be made far, far, far worse if you drink too much caffeine. Far worse. One is your overall health if you affect your sleep. Sleep is critical for improving your health. Now, because the half-life of coffee is like 6 to 8 hours, and it's going to stimulate your central nervous system, your body's going to produce more cortisol, more adrenaline, more epinephrine, and something called norepinephrine. And basically, you're going to be what we'd refer to loosely as wired. You don't want to have it beyond 10 hours before you go to bed. Now, this is really, really important. Sometimes you'll hear people saying, oh, it doesn't affect me because I can go out for a meal at 8 o'clock and have an espresso and then fall asleep at 11 o'clock. You can, but the research is very clear. It will affect your sleep. Whether you can fall asleep or not is not a good indicator of you getting a good night's sleep. It will affect your sleep quality, the most important part of your sleep being stage 4 REM, rapid eye movements, the most restorative part of your sleep, by 30%. So if you have caffeine in your system, it can knock down the quality of your overall quality of your sleep by 30%. Now, in order to have that much of a bad effect on your health, if you're repeating that every night, you would have to age someone by 20 years. That's how much damage it would do. So you want to stop drinking about 10 hours before bedtime. Again, the half-life of coffee is anywhere from 6 to 10 hours. So around 10 hours, 11 hours in, you're pretty good. So broadly speaking, I keep a rule. I don't drink caffeine after 12 o'clock. And again, I can drink caffeine at 3 o'clock. It mightn't affect me falling asleep, but I'm just aware of the sleep side of things. And occasionally I'll do it. I'll just go to hell. I just stay up late and watch YouTube or something, if I have a ton of work to do. Now, this is really important and something that's close to my heart because I've on and off struggled with anxiety for most of my adult life. But caffeine is the worst thing you can drink if you have anxiety, particularly if you have anxiety at the time. It's not that caffeine causes anxiety per se, but it amplifies any underlying pre-existing generalized anxiety disorder that you may or may not have. So for me, I don't get anxiety all the time. I've taken care of it with diet and exercise and that sort of stuff and fasting. But if I do feel a little bit of anxiety and I go, I'm busy, I'll drink coffee anyway, it gets 3 or 4 times worse. I stupidly make the mistake still to this day, but it gets dramatically worse. So the fight or flight response is what's triggering off with anxiety. And caffeine amplifies that. So it's something like quadruples. 3 or 4 coffees will quadruple your levels of norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol. It'll rattle your central nervous system if it's already on high alert. You just do not want to do it. So there are some contraindications. Another one is OCD. It'll make that much worse. Insomnia for obvious reasons. Atrial fibrillation, where you have an irregular heartbeat, it will make that worse as well, potentially. And also in pregnancy, it increases risk of, lots of awful stuff that I won't get into. But it's not good if you're pregnant to have. I think it's more than 2 coffees. You're okay. More than 2 in the case of pregnancy, and it increases risk of lots of stuff. So I will leave it at that for the moment. So basically, just to sum up, coffee blocks adenosine receptors. When it comes out of your bloodstream, it comes off that adenosine receptor even, what we call being dislodged from the adenosine receptor. That's why you get the sleepiness. And some people go, this is where you make a mistake with caffeine. Some people go, I'm sleepy at 3 o'clock, so I'm just going to caffeinate all the way up to 6 o'clock. And then whatever if I stay up a little bit later. But your sleep quality will definitely suffer. It's undoubtedly deleterious to your health to do that. It's harmful to your health. Don't do that. It doesn't cause cancer. It does increase your heart rate, your blood pressure, blood flow, all that sort of stuff. But actually, the research shows that it reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. You should probably have your last coffee at about 12 o'clock, max 1 o'clock. I wouldn't go beyond 1 o'clock, half 1. And I would definitely give it a miss if you have anxiety, OCD, insomnia, are pregnant, or atrial fibrillation. I hope you found that useful. I wanted to keep this one short. It's interesting, but I didn't want to go on for too long. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and just click the little notification button so you'll get a notification when we go live if you do get value from these sort of podcasts that we do. Guys, have a lovely day. Do drink some coffee, but not too much, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.